How does a nation really tell its true story? I mean, sure, official records give you the dates, the laws, the big events, but they hardly ever captured the real feeling, right? The actual pulse of a people. For that, you've got to look somewhere else. And today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're diving into the powerful stream of Bangladeshi short stories to find that unofficial emotional history.
And this quote right here from Professor Milton Biswas is our key. This is the whole idea. He's saying that these short stories, they aren't just entertainment. No way. They are an alternative national chronicle. Think about that. A living, breathing history of the nation, capturing all the raw emotion, the pain, the hope, that the official accounts just can't touch.
So, let's do it. Let's trace this literary stream together. We're going to follow it for nearly a century and see for ourselves how these incredible stories reflect the turmoil, the change, and honestly, the unbelievable resilience of the Bangladeshi people.
Which, of course, brings up a really good question. Why the short story? Why not novels or poems? Well, think about it. The short story is fast, it's intense, it's perfectly built to capture the immediate shockwaves of history, things like famine, war, or displacement. You could say that literature is often a nation's first responder, and if that's true, then the short story is its emergency kit.
Okay, so our journey starts back in the 1930s and 40s. At this point, Bangladesh is part of British India, and under colonial rule, you had to be careful with what you wrote. The literature had to be subtle, its resistance often hiding just beneath the calm surface. So just look at this timeline. Before 1947, you see this coded resistance. Then, bang! 1947 brings the partition, this absolutely cataclysmic event that just rips the subcontinent apart. And right after that, in the 1950s, the literature becomes a kind of vessel for all that pain, just echoing with the trauma of a completely fractured world.
And this slide just illustrates that shift so perfectly. On the one hand, you've got the pre-partition style, these quiet, almost serene scenes that were secretly hiding critiques of colonial rule. But then, after 1947, wow, the gloves are off. The writing becomes raw, it becomes haunted, it becomes fragmented, because that's exactly what society felt like.
And you can literally see this trauma right there on the page. Writers used all these techniques to capture the psychological fallout. Think about it. Unreliable narrators reflected confused identities. Open-ended stories mirrored a world where there was no easy closure. The stories themselves felt just like the shaky ground everyone was standing on.
All right, so that brings us to the 1960s. And the stream of stories we've been following, it's about to become a raging torrent. Because as political tensions rise, literature itself gets ready to go to war.
And this really poses the central question for this whole era, doesn't it? When a people are fighting for their identity, for their freedom, what's the role of the storyteller? Are they just supposed to watch from the sidelines? Or is it something more?
The answer was crystal clear. Stories stopped being just quiet reflections. They became tools of resistance. They became a way to fight back against oppression, not with bullets, but with ideas, with emotions, with truth. And the power of this literature wasn't just in making arguments. It was in the imagery. It forged these powerful new symbols of cultural identity, symbols that spoke directly to the people, reminding them of their shared heritage and their collective desire for freedom. And this is so crucial. It preserved memory. At a time when official histories were trying to erase or rewrite the people's struggle, a single short story could capture the truth of one moment, a conversation in a tea shop, a family's fear, a student protest. These stories became a defiant archive, a guarantee that the human experience would never be forgotten. So, writers basically developed a whole new toolkit for this fight. The focus shifted to the cities, right into the heart of the political struggle. Timelines were shattered to reflect the chaos of the time, and the stories themselves were just infused with this revolutionary energy, capturing the absolute urgency of the moment. They even started using some really clever techniques, like metafiction. So what on earth is that? Well, it's basically fiction that knows it's fiction. It's a story that kind of winks at you and says, hey, I know I'm just a story. And writers use this to question everything, to ask, what is truth? Whose story is the real one? This was an incredibly powerful way to challenge official propaganda during the war. And the symbolism from this time? Wow, it became incredibly potent. Just look at this. Smoke wasn't just smoke anymore. It was the confusion of war, the way trauma is so hard to grasp. Blood didn't just represent violence. It stood for the human cost, the deep moral injury of the conflict. And shattered homes became this heartbreaking metaphor for a fractured nation.
So after the brutal liberation war of 1971, Bangladesh was finally born. But, independence wasn't some simple happy ending. The 1970s brought a very difficult new reality. It was a time of reckoning, with both the promises and the heavy burdens of a new dawn.
And to really get the literature of the 70s, you have to understand this idea of the moral gray zone. The stories, they moved beyond simple heroes and villains. They started exploring the messy, complicated aftermath of war, where good people sometimes did difficult things, and the lines between right and wrong were constantly blurred.
This slide just lays it out so starkly. On one side, you have the promise of liberation, liberty, equality, all this utopian hope. And on the other side, you have the tough reality of the 1970s, corruption, disillusionment, and this growing sense that some of those ideals had been betrayed. It forced a lot of critical introspection.
So the stories of this decade were just filled with these heavy, complex questions. How do you actually heal from trauma? What happens when comrades turn on each other? And maybe the biggest question of all, what do you choose to remember and what do you desperately try to forget?
And so that brings us to the end of our journey, for today anyway. But the stream itself, of course, it just keeps on going. We've traced how these amazing short stories have acted as this constant flowing chronicle of a nation's very soul.
Let's end with this thought, okay? A nation's story isn't a static monument, something carved in stone and left to be admired. No, it's a river, just like the one we've been following. It's constantly moving, constantly changing, and always carving new paths. If you really want to understand Bangladesh, you have to read its stories, because that stream is still flowing right now, which really makes you wonder, what story is it telling now?